Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Introduction. Welcome to this summary of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This groundbreaking book interweaves Indigenous wisdom with scientific understanding, offering a transformative perspective on our relationship with the natural world. Kimmerer, both a botanist and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, guides us through a journey that challenges Western approaches to nature and invites us into a worldview where humans and the earth exist in reciprocal relationship. The book's title itself is significant. Sweetgrass is a sacred plant in many indigenous cultures, and braiding represents the interweaving of three strands: indigenous ways of knowing, scientific knowledge, and the story of learning to see. As we move through this summary, you'll discover how these three strands create something stronger and more beautiful together than any could alone. Chate, Part 1. Planting Sweetgrass. The foundation of Indigenous ecological wisdom. The opening section establishes the fundamental difference between Indigenous and Western relationships with nature. Kimmerer begins with the Sky Woman creation story, contrasting it with the biblical story of Eve. While Eve's story speaks of exile from paradise, Sky Woman's tale describes her falling from the sky world onto the back of a turtle, where she creates the earth by dancing plants into existence with seeds from the sky world. This story teaches gratitude, reciprocity, and humanity's role as caretakers rather than dominators. Kimmerer shares her experience as a young student entering college, eager to learn about why asters and goldenrod look beautiful together. When she declared her desire to major in botany to learn why plants are so beautiful, she was told that beauty wasn't science. This early disconnect between Indigenous understanding and Western science would shape her life's work, finding ways to honor both perspectives. The serviceberry economy. One of the most powerful concepts introduced early is the serviceberry economy, based on the generous giving of the serviceberry plant. Unlike a market economy based on scarcity and competition, Kimmerer describes an indigenous economy built on abundance and gift-giving. When the serviceberries ripen, they offer themselves freely to all beings, birds, bears, and people. This creates cycles of reciprocity rather than accumulation. She contrasts this with modern economics, which she argues is based on taking rather than giving, scarcity rather than abundance. The Honourable Harvest, central to this section, is the concept of the Honourable Harvest, a set of Indigenous guidelines for how to take from the earth sustainably and respectfully. The principles include: never take the first, never take the last, take only what you need, use everything you take, give thanks and offer gifts in return, and sustain the ones who sustain you. These aren't just conservation guidelines. They're a moral framework that assumes plants and animals are persons deserving of respect and gratitude. Kimmerer illustrates this through her experience gathering sweetgrass. She learned that sweetgrass thrives when it's harvested respectfully. Taking only some stems while leaving others actually stimulates growth. This mirrors scientific findings, but is framed within relationship rather than resource extraction. The plant responds to being needed and cared for, teaching that sustainability isn't just about limits, but about reciprocal relationship. Part 2. Tending Sweetgrass. Maple Nation, a Citizenship Guide. This section deepens the exploration of reciprocity through the story of maple sugaring. Kimmerer describes how maple trees offer their sap as a gift each spring, and how her family's participation in sugaring creates bonds across generations and with the land itself. She introduces the concept of the Maple Nation, the idea that we might consider ourselves citizens not just of human nations, but of the community of maples, with the responsibilities that citizenship entails. The maple doesn't give its sweetness to humans because it must, but as a gift. This reframes our relationship with resources. We're not extracting from the earth, but receiving gifts, which creates an obligation to give back. She contrasts indigenous gratitude practices with modern consumption, where we've become so disconnected that we don't know who or what to thank for our food and materials. Witch Hazel and the Windigo Kimmerer explores the concept of the Windigo, a legendary creature in Anishinaabe tradition that represents insatiable greed and consumption. The Windigo has a heart of ice and an endless hunger that can never be satisfied. She draws powerful parallels to modern consumer culture, where the Windigo spirit manifests in corporations and systems built on endless growth and consumption of the Earth's resources. The antidote to Windigo thinking, she suggests, is carried by the witch hazel plant. Witch hazel blooms in late autumn when all other plants have finished, offering its gifts when nothing else does. It teaches generosity in times of scarcity. Through botanical knowledge combined with traditional stories, Kimmerer shows how plants model the values needed to heal our relationship with the earth. The Three Sisters, perhaps the most famous teaching in the book, is about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. Kimmerer explains both the agricultural science and the indigenous story behind this companion planting system. Scientifically, the corn provides a stalk for beans to climb. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil for the corn, and squash leaves shade the ground to retain moisture and prevent weeds. Together, they create more than they could separately. But the story goes deeper. The three sisters teach about community, complementarity, and the idea that gifts multiply through relationship. Each sister has different gifts, and when planted together, they create abundance. This serves as a model for human society. We're strongest when we recognize our interdependence and different gifts. The story challenges individualistic thinking and competitive frameworks, offering instead a vision of cooperative thriving. Part 3. Picking Sweetgrass. The Grammar of Animacy. In one of the book's most philosophically profound sections, Kimmerer explores how language shapes perception. She contrasts English, where most beings are referred to as it, with Potawatomi and other indigenous languages where the majority of nouns are animate. A bay is animate, rocks can be animate, trees are persons who can be referred to as who rather than what. This isn't primitive anthropomorphizing, it's a recognition of the aliveness and agency of the more than human world. When we speak of a forest as it, we create grammatical permission to treat nature as object rather than subject. When we speak of a river as a being, we're more likely to consider its well-being in our decisions. Kimmerer suggests that the dominance of objectifying language has contributed to environmental destruction by making it easier to ignore the personhood of nature. She shares her own journey of trying to reclaim Potawatomi language and the cognitive shift it requires. Learning to speak to plants as persons, to use plural forms that include both human and non-human beings, begins to rebuild the worldview where humans are part of, rather than separate from, the natural community. Asters and Goldenrod. Returning to the question that first drew her to botany, why do asters and goldenrod look so beautiful together? Kimmerer finally finds her answer, not in textbooks, but through understanding both science and aesthetics. Scientifically, the purple and yellow are complementary colours that create maximum contrast. But aesthetically and ecologically, they bloom together in late summer, creating beauty at the end of the season as a gift. This chapter illustrates Kimmerer's central thesis. Indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge aren't opposed, but complementary, like the flowers themselves. Science can tell us how things work, but Indigenous wisdom asks why and considers beauty, purpose, and relationship as legitimate forms of knowledge. The purple and gold together demonstrate both biological partnership and aesthetic generosity. Learning the grammar of reciprocity. Kimmerer argues that we need to learn a new grammar, not just of language, but of action. Reciprocity must become our default mode of relationship with the earth. This means more than sustainable harvesting. It means asking what we can give back, how we can enhance the well-being of the beings and systems that sustain us. She provides practical examples through restoration ecology, showing how tending damaged land is a form of reciprocity. When we work to restore wetlands, replant prairies, or clean waterways, we're not just fixing problems, we're entering into relationship, giving back to the earth that gives to us. This work requires humility, patience, and the recognition that we have much to learn from the land itself about how to heal. Part 4. Braiding Sweetgrass. Shkitagan, People of the Seventh Fire. This section introduces the Anishinaabe prophecy of the seventh fire, which speaks of a time when people would have to choose between two paths, one well-worn but scorched, the other green but overgrown from disuse. The prophecy says that young people would turn back to pick up what was left by the trail, to recover the old teachings and find a new way forward that honors both traditional wisdom and new knowledge. Kimmerer identifies herself and many others working in Indigenous revitalization and environmental restoration as people of this seventh fire. They're not trying to return to an idealized past, but to recover ancient wisdom and integrate it with current understanding to create sustainable futures. This isn't nostalgia, it's recovery and innovation together. Collateral damage. Kimmerer confronts the painful history of colonization and its ongoing impacts on both Indigenous peoples and the land. She describes how federal policies deliberately separated Native people from their languages, their lands, and their traditional practices as a way of destroying Indigenous cultures. The Carlisle Indian School's motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man," exemplifies the explicit goal of cultural genocide. But she emphasizes that the violence against Indigenous peoples and the violence against the earth are connected. Both stem from a worldview that sees the land and its original peoples as obstacles to be overcome, rather than teachers to be honored. The same extractive mindset that justified taking Indigenous lands now justifies extracting resources without regard for future generations or ecological consequences. Yet this section isn't only about damage. Kimmerer describes ongoing resistance and recovery. Languages are being revitalized, traditional practices restored, and Indigenous sovereignty movements are protecting both cultural and ecological heritage. She sees hope in the resilience of both Indigenous communities and the more than human world, which continues to offer gifts despite centuries of abuse. The Sacred and the Superfund. One of the most striking chapters describes Onondaga Lake near Syracuse, New York, which is both a sacred site in Haudenosaunee tradition and one of the most polluted lakes in America, designated a Superfund cleanup site. This juxtaposition illustrates the conflict between seeing places as sacred versus seeing them as resources to exploit and sacrifice. Kimmerer participated in traditional water ceremonies at the lake's edge, offering gratitude and prayers for healing alongside Indigenous women who refused to accept the desecration of sacred waters. She argues that our environmental crisis is fundamentally a crisis of relationship. We've forgotten how to be in right relationship with the earth and with each other. The cleanup of Onondaga Lake through Superfund processes is technical and expensive, but Kimmerer asks whether technical solutions alone can heal what's been broken. True restoration, she suggests, requires not just removing pollutants, but restoring relationship, returning to the understanding that waters are sacred and deserving of respect and care. Part 5. Burning Sweetgrass. Windigo footprints. Returning to the Windigo concept, Kimmerer traces how Windigo thinking has created climate change, mass extinction, and social inequality. The Windigo's endless hunger manifests in economic systems demanding endless growth, in consumption patterns that can never satisfy, in the willingness to sacrifice the future for present gain. She argues that our environmental crisis is really a crisis of culture and consciousness. We've organized our societies around Windigo values: scarcity thinking, competition, accumulation, individualism, and these values are destroying the earth. Technical solutions matter, but without addressing the underlying worldview, they'll never be sufficient. The antidote to the Windigo, she suggests, is gratitude. When we recognize the Earth's gifts and feel genuine gratitude, we naturally want to give back. Gratitude short-circuits the logic of endless consumption by helping us recognize when we have enough. It transforms our relationship with the world from taking to reciprocity. Defeating Windigo. A story. Kimmerer shares traditional stories about how the Windigo is defeated, not through violence, but through warmth, generosity, and the melting of its ice heart. She connects this to our current moment. We can defeat Windigo thinking by practicing and spreading cultures of generosity, reciprocity, and gratitude. This isn't naive optimism. Kimmerer acknowledges the scale of environmental destruction and the power of systems organized around extraction and growth. But she insists that cultural transformation is possible and essential. Every choice to live reciprocally, every act of gratitude and giving, every relationship we rebuild with the land, weakens Windigo thinking and strengthens alternative ways of being. People of Corn, People of Light. In one of the book's final chapters, Kimmerer reflects on what it means to be people of corn versus people of light. Many indigenous peoples of the Americas identify as corn people, recognizing corn as a sacred gift and themselves as caretakers of this relationship. This identity is rooted in place, in specific relationships with specific land and beings. In contrast, modern culture often speaks of humans as evolved to capture light energy through plants, a scientific but disconnected way of understanding our place. Kimmerer asks what it would mean to reclaim identity rooted in reciprocal relationship rather than abstract principles. Who would we be if we understood ourselves as people in relationship with particular lands, waters, plants, and animals? Restoration. The book's environmental and spiritual climax comes in Kimmerer's discussion of restoration, of land, of language, of relationship, of culture. She describes restoration ecology projects as acts of reciprocity, where humans actively work to heal damage and support the flourishing of ecological communities. But restoration isn't about returning to some pristine past. It's about learning from the past to create resilient futures. It requires humility, patience, and the willingness to be taught by the land itself. Kimmerer shares stories of restoration projects where Indigenous knowledge and scientific practice work together, each enriching the other. She emphasizes that restoring the land and restoring Indigenous cultures are interconnected projects. As Indigenous languages are revitalized, they carry knowledge about how to live sustainably in specific places. As traditional practices return, They often prove to enhance, rather than harm, ecosystems. The health of the land and the health of Indigenous communities rise and fall together. Conclusion: Returning the Gift. The book concludes with a powerful meditation on gifts and responsibilities. Kimmerer reflects that the earth has given humans everything we need: food, water, air, beauty, meaning. The question isn't whether we can live sustainably, but whether we can learn to live with the gratitude and reciprocity that the earth's gifts deserve. She offers concrete practices for individuals: learning plant names, offering thanksgiving, reducing consumption, supporting Indigenous sovereignty, participating in ecological restoration, teaching reciprocity to children, and cultivating gratitude as a daily practice. But she emphasizes that individual actions, while important, must connect to collective transformation. We need new economic systems based on gifting rather than extraction, political systems that recognize the rights of nature, and educational systems that teach reciprocity. Ultimately, Braiding Sweetgrass offers a vision of hope grounded in relationship. Despite centuries of destruction, the earth continues to offer gifts. Plants still grow, waters still flow, and Indigenous knowledge persists. We can choose to receive these gifts with gratitude and return them with reciprocity. We can learn to braid together different ways of knowing: scientific and Indigenous, intellectual and spiritual, individual and collective. The sweetgrass itself embodies this hope. It's a plant that thrives when harvested respectfully, when tended with care, when engaged in relationship. Like sweetgrass, both human communities and ecological communities grow stronger through right relationship. The question is whether we'll accept the invitation to return to reciprocity, to live as if the world is a gift, to become indigenous to place wherever we live by learning from those who've sustained reciprocal relationships with land for thousands of years. Kimmerer ends with an invitation to become naturalized to place, to learn the names and needs of the beings around us, to practice gratitude and reciprocity, and to pass on these teachings. The braiding of sweetgrass continues, strand by strand, person by person, relationship by relationship, creating something beautiful and strong enough to sustain us all.